Hi everyone, hope you guys are all having a great day today. In today's video, I'm going to cover the whole entire market in terms of Dow Jones, Nasdaq, and S&P 500, including the economic calendar. Now, I do post these videos up daily, so I highly encourage you to double check the latest video on my channel, so that way you get the most up-to-date information. And before I get to the analysis portion, I'm going to go over the economic calendar. And on Monday, September 30th, 2024, at 8:50 a.m., we have Federal Reserve Governor Michelle Bowman speak. At 9:45 a.m., we have Chicago Business Barometer PMI for September. And 1:55 p.m., we have Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell speak as well. I would say this is probably one of the most important things at 1:55 p.m. for Monday, September 30th, 2024. Now, for the economic calendar, or in terms of the charts, the S&P, the Dow Jones are both at all-time high zones. You can see right about here, pretty much hovering around all-time high zones for the S&P 500. Looking at ETF, SPY, ETF for the S&P 500. We have an upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010. Mind you, every time we went up, it just got knocked down basically for the most part. The market was still going up. Doesn't mean the market's not going up. And we are in the mid zone right now for the time being. The SPY ETF for S&P 500 closed at $571.47. We still have more room to grow to the upside, but we've had some situations where we are in the mid zone and still did drop to the upward trend support level as well. I'm not expecting any drops or anything because the trend is still to the upside. If you look at the MACD line here, it indicates if we're in a bearish or bullish movement. Still in the bullish movement. It is somewhat slowing down, I would say, and there is a potential challenge of a level, I would say, where we could probably somewhat see a small pullback, and I'll show why, specifically more for the fact that Nasdaq is approaching is at a level dating back since 2010 as well, and for the fact that S&P 500 and the Dow Jones are at all-time high zones. Again, this is ETF SPY, ETF for S&P 500, and we're at the all-time high zone for the S&P 500, and Dow Jones is the exact same thing. Here's the Dow Jones and the all-time high zone as well, and if I zoom into a 3-month chart, you can see pretty much created an all-time high and hovering around the same price points, give or take. Now back to the S&P 500, ETF for the SPY, ETF for the S&P 500. You can see that pretty much looking at the 1-year chart, the volume has been pretty much kind of somewhat sales slowing down, still created a high, but the MACD line is, even though it's bullish, is kind of trying to come down to maybe go to the bearish territory. But then if you look at the 5-year chart, it looks like it's about to go bullish still. Now, it doesn't have to go 100% bullish, even though it is showing green tick, but there's been times we still get pulled down nonetheless. Right about here, it was about to cross over, still got pulled down. Ultimately, the trend is still to the upside in my opinion, but again, SPY and Dow Jones all-time high, or S&P 500 and Dow Jones all-time high. And for Nasdaq, the critical level basically that I want to show is right about here. So same thing as the S&P 500, upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010. Did break through in 2020 to 2022, came back underneath, had issues passing it when it came underneath in March of 2024. Broke through in July of 2024, but the whole entire market, Nasdaq, S&P 500, and Dow Jones created all-time highs for the market in July of 2024. The Nasdaq is the only one, by the way, here's the July of 2024. It broke through the 2010 upward trend resistance level, which is this line right about here when we came back underneath and had issues passing it. But in July of 2024, broke through. But the Nasdaq is the only one that has not recently created all-time highs. And what I mean by that is the S&P passed the July of 2024 all-time high it created in July of 2024. The Dow Jones also passed the July of 2024 the all-time high it created as well. But the Nasdaq is still not passing that all-time high dating back to July of 2024. You could argue because we're at the upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010. Now in August of 2024, we tested it and had false breakouts. And as of recent pre-market, and technically during the early part of the trading day, as of Thursday, September 26, 2024, we did pass the upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010 as well, but came back underneath it, and you could see pretty much after hours test and a pre-market test as well. A little bit of small false breakouts, but you could contribute that to potentially my line. Upward trend resistance line is not perfect, right? Now the question is, are we going to pass this upward trend resistance line dating back since 2010 completely to a point that the trend is still to the upside? Because the S&P and the Nasdaq and Dow Jones are all showing the uptrend, or the trend is to the upside still for the time being. Because the S&P 500 that I showed, they're all pretty much showing the exact same thing. So for example, Nasdaq, I'm going to just quickly show. Here's the 1-year chart, still bullish. And then you could argue that maybe it wants to slow down to go to bearish territory potentially, because we've seen two pretty much predominantly sell days for the most part. You can see 2 red candles too as well. 5-year chart hasn't crossed over to bullish, but it wants to, looks like. And doesn't guarantee that we're going to cross over, because we've seen in the past it was pretty much a false false pull down, like false upside to pull down kind of thing. And then the all chart, same thing, 50-50. Dow Jones is pretty much prevalently showing upside. So 1 year chart, it's curving up to the upside. 5 year chart, upside even stronger than all of them for the 5 year chart, and it's already crossed over versus the S&P and Nasdaq, which haven't crossed over. And actually S&P has crossed over, but it's just early phase, right? And then the all chart is stronger than all of them. So again, overall uptrend, but at the same time doesn't mean we won't see down days. And technically, like I stated, with the Nasdaq being at the 2010 level, there's a chance with the S&P and Dow Jones being at the all-time high zones, we could be seeing a small pullback, right? Small pullback, and then bounce back up to continue the uptrend overall for the time being. And if you're wondering what this uptrend resistance line is, looking at ETF QQQ, ETF for the Nasdaq, it closed at $486.75. This uptrend, the longer we take, the higher the high will be. But right now, it's currently sitting at $491 for the most part and some change. And again, just because it passed 491 doesn't mean that that's not necessarily a false breakout. We saw it multiple times before recently, and you could see that this line is clearly a resistance line because multiple times it's hitting resistance and having quite issues passing it, right? Again, the reason why it's going up though is because the longer we take to pass the line, the higher the high will be, right? And then if you're wondering what the all-time high previously was, pretty much around $505, give or take, and some change. 504 and some change, 505 and some change. But you could argue maybe we're waiting until we pass the upward trend, or maybe, yeah, once we pass the upward trend resistance line dating back to 2010, the market is waiting to create a new all-time high for Nasdaq, and then maybe the tides might change where the trend might be to the downside. But again, for the time being, the trend is to the upside. Doesn't mean that it's always going to go up. There's down days as well that's going to come, and you could argue we might be nearing somewhat of a small pullback for the time being because of the levels we're at with the S&P and Dow Jones all-time high, and then the Nasdaq being at 2010, probably just testing it a couple times and then pulling down, and then finally going back up to the uptrend, breaking through resistance levels, and then we'll see what happens when we test the all-time high of July 2024 for Nasdaq. But that's basically it for today's video. If you found it beneficial, consider dropping a like. It does help the channel, so thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. And if you want to be notified when I do upload my next video, consider following, subscribing so you'll be notified when I do. And thanks again for watching. Take care. God bless and peace.